Hi everyone, and welcome to InSide HubSpot. I am Colleen Coyne. I am here today with two veteran HubSpotters, John Marcus, inbound marketing specialist, Mike Redbord, an inbound marketing consultant. And we're here today to talk about a project that they worked on over the last, say, year or so. And so to get things started, I met with Halligan several weeks ago and did an interview like this, and we talked about internal ventures. And the idea of allowing and even encouraging employees to start their own companies within HubSpot. And it's sort of a real distinct part of the culture here, I think, that people are allowed to do that, employees are encouraged to do that. So that said, that's kind of what you guys are doing. So John, give us a little background on the project you guys worked on.
Sure. So what we work on right now is the e-commerce project. And we work with businesses that sign up to HubSpot, specifically that have e-commerce businesses. So they're selling products online, that's kind of how they make their revenue. And how this whole thing got started was kind of a ways back. I've got a background in e-commerce, and I really liked the e-commerce businesses. So I started selling to them, even though I wasn't necessarily supposed to. And then by happenstance, Mike was looking at this really hard problem in one of the projects that he was working on that kind of crossed over. So we were both kind of trying to tackle the same problem, one from the services side with Mike and then from the sales side on my side. And we're like, we should probably combine forces. We can tackle this. It's a really hard problem, but that's how the whole thing got started.
Yeah, I think I remember one day where I basically made a little pitch deck for myself, about 5 slides, and I got myself a meeting with basically at that time everyone was a senior manager at HubSpot, and started with a question. It said, should HubSpot sell to e-commerce customers? And then I cited one word on it, and said yes, and then I had some data and stuff to back it up. And from that point on, it was pretty much the project was pretty much launched.
Right, because historically, e-commerce was looked at as sort of a bad fit for HubSpot. I mean, that's sort of the way that we started. And then I think, in my experience, you were the first person that was like, I'm not so sure I'm sold on that concept, and then you guys came up.
I was new enough, and almost didn't have enough experience to have all that baggage with me. So I had been at HubSpot for 4 or 5 months, and I thought like, hey, this seems like it can work. We have the technology to do this. Why don't we try it? And it worked.
Cool. Very nice. So another thing that I think is important to point out is that because it's encouraged, many sort of mini startups on the HubSpot, ideas come up, many are launched. Most actually don't make it to the finish line. So talk to me a little bit about why you think your project was successful.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that we had a pretty good kind of chemistry between us. The project was not successful immediately. There were about 4 or 5 months there that were pretty rough. Like, we were not really executing on all cylinders. We didn't quite have product market fit. There were all sorts of things that were just kind of wacky. But we worked really hard, and that helped win kind of the trust of a lot of people, and we had good enough numbers in order to kind of get through, I think.
Yeah, one of the big things was when we were at kind of the bottom of the J curve, as you say, when we were kind of in those darkest days, was as we kept working harder and harder, we iterated really fast.
Yeah.
So from week to week, we changed our consulting and sales process, and you can't do that unless you've got a really small team that works very close together. So between all the other people that were involved in the project, and Mike and I, we were sitting down once a week and saying, okay, here are the numbers that didn't work, let's try something else. Yeah. And we had enough air cover where we could actually have that time to figure it out. By putting in that effort, the top management was like, all right, you guys are trying really hard. We're going to give you 60, 90 days to figure it out, but you better come with an answer at the end.
And every week the numbers were better.
Yeah.
They were totally different. they were better each week, which, we were making incremental progress, which I think was the most important thing for senior management.
Right, because one of the things that Brian was clear about in his interview was that this isn't sort of easy. You have to, there are certain metrics that they're looking for to see if this project is going to be a success or not. If you don't meet those metrics, that's when they basically it dies. So I know you guys, when we were talking in our previous conversation, we're kind of scratching and clawing a little bit, buying time here and there, like, not letting them shut you down.
Yeah. Just survival is one of the things that we have on our list of 3 things that we talk about. What e-commerce really is. Number 1 rule is survive. Right. Get the numbers in, whatever we're being measured by, figure out how to make it happen, buy us some more time until we can figure out the right solution for it. And it took us until probably the beginning of this year to really actually figure out who this person was and how we're going to consult and how we're going to sell them. So definitely by the skin of our teeth.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have too much to add to that other than the survival was hitting the numbers that were the financial numbers basically. So we were bringing in money commensurate with the amount of money that the board was sort of investing in us. So they were happy to keep us around, even if not everything was working totally correctly.
Right, because you're at least at break even or
Right.
whatever.
Yeah, they're almost like the venture capitalists, and they're like, well, we're not hemorrhaging money on you, so keep going. You guys can make a little bit of right eventually.
And one of the other things that is interesting about the whole process of internal ventures and what makes a successful venture and what doesn't is sort of the team, right? So one of the things that we talked about prior to this too was that you're kind of a problem solver, you're sort of a builder, and not to mention you must both be really good recruiters because your team are, as you said, volunteers.
Yeah.
So talk to us of the challenges of recruiting volunteers.
Yeah, so we were kind of sitting down and we're like, well, we got way too much on our plate for us to actually tackle ourselves. So I was thinking of where can we get extra talent, and we looked around and they're like, well, you can't really get marketing resources because it doesn't make sense. So we're like, okay, well, we're just make up our own marketers. So we started working with some other IMCs, consultants here at HubSpot, Billy McDonald and Mike Ewing. And we said, hey guys, we really want to make this work. And it was kind of on their backs that a lot of the extra work that kind of supported the structure got done. Really kind of the third point, I talked about those 3 points. The third point is this is a volunteer organization. There's no promise for glory. There's no promise that this will work. It's in your nights and weekends. But I can promise you that it's going to be a lot of fun and we're tackling really hard problems.
Yeah, I mean, there were a variety of people along the way sort of helped out with various things. We were able to make the project, this is not disingenuous, but I think the project was very interesting internally to people at HubSpot. It was new, it was different, it was counterintuitive, sort of counterculture even.
Right, sure.
So at any given point in time, there were probably 10 people who were interested in what we were doing, interested enough to say, well, how can I help? I talked to these people, would you want to talk to them? So introductions, little bits of help in marketing or whatever else we needed, kind of just flowed in after we built those relationships.
Excellent.
That pitching the idea is always very, very important.
Right.
Got
The sales guy at heart. Sales guy at
Gotta have a
heart.
good
This is
elevator
gonna be
pitch.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, it really was. It was like pitching, your first couple employees at an actual, brand new startup.
Right.
With an internal venture, you've got that thing. You've got your venture capitalists, which are the internal executives. You're trying to recruit talent with not a whole lot you can kind of envision. So.
And before I move on to the next topic, it is important, I think, for people to realize that you are answering to a board much the way a VC-backed startup answers to their board. It's made up of the executive team mostly, I think, and maybe some other individuals. But I mean, it's for real. You have monthly board meetings to sort of present what you guys have been up to, and I'm sure along the way they're always trying to poke holes in what you guys are doing. You have to answer those questions.
Yeah, it's interesting because every single month we have these internal board meetings, and they pretty much make a go-no-go decision at that point. So we put in a little extra time and effort into making sure that message is very clear and that the issues from the prior month have been kind of solved in that 30-day period. It's a little stressful. We definitely get dressed up a little bit more and try to present ourselves, sit up straight and smile during that meeting.
Don't dress up too much. Isn't that the first rule of
Yeah,
VC?
exactly.
Don't give money to the guy in the suit.
Exactly.
Those meetings are intense. They're intense because it's not just our project. There's many, many projects, like you said, at HubSpot that are either going to go another month or are going to get killed. So it's not only, well, how are you doing? It's also, how is everybody else doing? It's sort of, how does this contribute to the enterprise value of HubSpot? Like e-commerce, all right, seems cool, it's sort of interesting, but wait a minute. Something else over here that's got real potential for hyper-explosive growth. Well, we need to double down on that, not you guys. So we needed to not only survive and hit our numbers, but also be interesting enough and show the potential for really big growth to get continued investment.
So far, it's a very pretty picture. You guys have a good idea, you work really hard, you work harder, you sell, you do a great job. But like any startup, I suspect, and I haven't done an internal venture, but I suspect it's like starting a company, and most of the lessons you learn are probably going to be through mistakes or things that you didn't see coming, or just unforeseeable circumstances. So talk to us to that point about some of the real blunders or things that really changed how you guys approached the project.
I think, well, we started out with an idea of how we would implement our software with these customers, how we would onboard them and get them successful with it. And I'd say the current iteration, the one that's working, is probably about 170 degrees off from that. It's like just got like a piece of it in there. We sort of had to move very quickly, as John said. Every week we were doing something completely different. That also meant that there were some real challenges in dealing with customers that we would onboard, and we had to go back and teach something else or something like that. So there were some real tricky parts with managing signing up the right customers and making sure that they were happy with the product that they bought.
Yeah, we had this issue, kind of around the Christmas season where we were focused really a lot on businesses that, there's a very heavy impact in kind of like Cyber Monday, and they pretty much, locked down their site. The businesses are like, all we're going to do is just ship packages from here through the new year. So it was really hard to have conversations on the sales side with those individuals. Santa Claus was kind of, messing with our deal there. And what kind of helped out a lot during that time was just very, very high contact communication between Mike and I. If there was a customer that came across that was absolutely terrible and just wasn't going to fit with it, I knew about it like that day, and the next call that I got on, I would kind of take his learnings from his call and apply it right back into the sales process.
Mm-hmm.
So sitting next to one another and working next to each other 10 hours a day, 6 days a week for months, paid dividends because we tackle problems in different ways. But he sees the customer side, I see the sales side, and those two work together to help each other out.
Yeah, we literally sat about this far from each other for 8 months, and not only we would sometimes be like, look, we can't be in this office anymore. We've been here too much.
Mm-hmm.
It's a nice place, but you can only spend so much time in one place, so we'd have to go somewhere else and then sit this far
Let's
from
go
each other.
and
Talk about the same stuff, just
whatever.
a change of scenery. So it was, there was a very intense back and forth over the business problems for those couple of months there, and that really what helped us, as John said, get out of that J curve and start turn this project into something.
So it sounds like they were the problem was that, HubSpot's great for e-commerce, but not all e-commerce. So it was sort of, I think you guys called searching for Ernie. Searching for Ernie. You created a persona that you were going to be looking for, and just kind of really refining who that persona is. It's sort of a lot of trial and error, a lot of error.
Absolutely.
Error and trial.
There was tons of error in there, and that was my job. That was my obsession for like 3 months.
Yeah.
Find Ernie, this guy, e-commerce Ernie, this persona who fits really well with HubSpot. And then finally we just started having some really good conversations. The deal started coming in, and I'm like, huge sigh of relief, 2 weeks before this do or die board meeting, and I'm like, oh, okay, let's bring in some deals, let's get them in as quick as possible, let's get them on the board.
And the other thing was, during that time, I think, I was able to take what we were doing that actually was working to a degree and package it up in a way that the board liked, because, we're doing something right? And that, so while John was kind of trying to figure out what the target market was, I was keeping sort of the, VCs at bay, if you will.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
Yeah, sure.
Critical aspect to any internal venture is have somebody who's really, really good presenting data,
Right.
especially in a company like HubSpot. Because if you can make that data sing for you, you can get a little bit more in your cover.
And I suspect that on the board there's a certain balance, because they've been where you are basically, so they understand trial and error, and they appreciate trial and error, but at the same time you have to start presenting some metrics that show some potential for success. So I suspect that the errors, although nobody likes to make them, we all understand that they happen, and they're not.
I think the thing they wanted to see was trial, error, not trial, error. Right? They wanted us to be trying stuff, and the thing that we tried, we had a reason for trying it. Let's move this number this way.
Right. And my dad always said the only people that don't make mistakes are the people who do nothing.
Right. We're not guilty of that.
You have plenty of mistakes under your belt. That's
Yeah.
great. So one other thing that I wanted to touch on, I think that I'd be remiss if I didn't, is sort of the marketing aspect of it. There was sort of a very small but significant marketing effort internally.
So it started out we knew we needed to basically do inbound marketing for this vertical, but we didn't really have marketing resources, like John said, because this is just an internal venture. It's not like a whole part of the company, not a business unit yet. So I had this idea, well, we should create a white paper and ebook, kind of basic inbound marketing stuff. And then one day it sort of started. I remember I just wrote like probably equivalent to like 10 pages in a couple hours in my Google Docs. That was the basis for it. And then Mike Ewing, who we mentioned before, me and him sat down over the course of about a week. It was every day from like 6 o'clock to about 1 in the morning. We just worked on this thing, we cranked it out, and it turned out to be really a piece of content. I think it's been downloaded a couple thousand times, and it's been spread out. That's where we get our best leads for John here.
Absolutely. The nights and weekends thing was probably the strongest when Mike and Mike were working on the ebook. And once we had that first big piece of content, that's kind of like the opus maxim, if you will, and then everything kind of came off of that. So I mean, we can add in extra blog posts, you can add in kind of landing pages and different offers around that. But to have that kind of stake in the ground for like, this is what we stand for and this is how e-commerce and inbound marketing works, that's what we needed to kind of rally the troops together and like get everyone moving. And that was a big milestone for us, and we carried a lot of momentum.
Something that was unexpectedly helpful too was we had never really thought about the entirety of what inbound marketing means for these types of companies. When we wrote 35 pages on it, we had pretty much figured it out. So it helped actually reduce some of the error that maybe we did in the future, because we kind of knew like, oh, well, we think you should use this tactic. We weren't going into it totally blind. So the ebook was educational for us too, as consultants.
So the final thing that I wanted to talk about is sort of how, one of the goals of these videos and these interviews that I do is sort of let people into HubSpot, let people really understand, meet some people, understand how things work. And one of the things that you said when we were talking prior to this was that you're drawn to industries where there are very few rules. You don't like rules, and so to that end, or to that point, you know, how's HubSpot fit into what, you know, your sort of ideal culture, and what about it, you know, allowed you guys to sort of do this? And is it different than other companies that you've worked at?
So when I came out of college, I knew that I wanted to go into something high tech because I knew that it was growing the fastest. Startups were interesting, even though I had zero involvement basically in them. I've read TechCrunch or Hacker News or something. I'm like, this looks cool. I knew that there weren't a whole lot of rules because there was a lot of opportunity. Where there's more opportunity, typically there's not a whole lot of structure yet, right? So I went into a high tech company that was relatively small. It kind of grew. Then I moved on and wanted to do it again. And that's essentially how I ended up at HubSpot. I wanted to work someplace that was kind of as Halligan says, it's a postmodern organization with not a lot of organizational structure and a lot of leeway to do things like we did.
Yeah, I think the one big thing that kind of pulled me to HubSpot and specifically to this project is that you can build what you want. You know, if you have an idea, you can scrape together some resources and actually put something together that lasts. And you know, just as HubSpot grows, you know, e-commerce is part of that. So now it's a chunk of HubSpot that was kind of born out of an idea that we had sat down and kind of hashed it out on the back of a piece of paper, and now it's something that's a living, breathing part of the organization. And I think that's just so important to any kind of startup company or any tech company that you're involved with, is that you can experiment, you can try out stuff, you can fail, and then at the same time you can still come back to your day job. You can have fun at the same time.
I think it's interesting because you actually had some real true blue startup experience. You were in Y Combinator, you know, you did the whole like startup thing, whereas I don't have any of that, but I've always kind of been, you know, doing internal venture type stuff. So we both brought a different perspectives to the table in this project.
Right, and I think that for entrepreneurial type people, I mean, what better experience if someday you want to start your own company to have gone through this process of starting your own company, you know, and having been able to do it with, you know, resources that are available to you, but not at your own expense.
Right. There's definitely
just your time.
There's definitely some
Lots of
training
time.
wheels on it, right? We can't pretend this is like, you know, going out there and filing for like an LLC and then just
Right.
doing it. There's certainly some training wheels, but those are really helpful to figuring out just like the things you need to do to grow a business unit. And the next step up from that is the whole thing.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much. I think this is a real interesting story, and I appreciate you guys taking some time to share it with me.
So thank you.